Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Cindy Hain, who's Vice President of Product Management at Alemica, where she focuses on the logistics solutions at the company. And today we're going to talk about supply chain visibility, lessons learned, and future opportunities. Now, achieving end-to-end supply chain visibility has always been a top priority for executives in the industry. But it has also been a challenge for many companies to achieve because supply chain networks, technologies, processes are constantly changing. What has where are we today with supply chain visibility? What have been some of the lessons learned over the years, and how are advancements in technologies helping to move the needle forward, if you will, in this whole area? Well, that's going to be some of the questions and topics we're going to discuss in today's episode. And it's great to welcome Cindy back to the program, who's on the front lines of this every day with both on the technology front as well as working with clients in this. So, to share her, perspective and advice on this topic. So, Cindy, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Cindy, like I said, supply chain visibility, I've been an industry analyst now for, over 19 years. And certainly when I started 19 years ago, it was top of mind for executives. You talk to executives today, it's still top of mind. So it's something that's, perennially, a topic that's high on the list. But what's driving demand for it today? Is it different than a few years ago? And especially, how does it kind of fit into kind of some of those other buzz terms and topics we're talking about today, like, the digital supply chain and Industry 4.0 and things like that?
Right. I feel like we've been talking about supply chain visibility for so long. But one of the things I think is different about the conversation now is where before we were talking about mostly event management and alerting solutions, and those solutions where you'd truck your data into this event management type of solution and use that to try to drive proactive alerts and things. What those solutions kind of failed to do is they weren't very robust to the underlying data. So they would generate lots of false alerts or not generate alerts when that were important. So companies kind of got disillusioned with those solutions and turned them off. So what I think is different about the conversation now is that now we're talking about the underlying data, because now there are all these additional technologies that will allow us to get data in real time. And so if we can collect this data that's from these new Internet of Things and smart devices, and we can harness that data, now we can maybe finally realize the true value of these supply chain visibility solutions that we've been talking about for a long time.
That's a great point. I mean, I think if you went back to, the early 2000s, I mean, there was a whole class of software vendors that came to market, startups that were all just visibility and event management, solution providers. And I think building off of what you just said, I mean, a lot of them, fell by the wayside because of the data quality problem, number one. And number two, it was, gathering and collecting that data was a problem, right? So it was not really just so much a software solution. You really needed that underlying B2B connectivity,
right,
approach and processes, and that was missing, certainly, 15, 20 years ago. And I think, to your point, I think that's becoming part of the focus today, right?
Definitely, yes.
So let's talk about some of the other kind of lessons learned. I mean, you've been on the front lines of this for some time now, working with clients in this area. I mean, what have been some of the the lessons learned over the years?
Well, I think I could put all of my lessons learned into the category of data quality. And you just mentioned that as well. But I think of data quality as having several dimensions. So is the data even available? If it's available, is it usable? Is it timely? Is it accurate? So if we just focus on the available piece, I've still got, there's so many companies out there who, when they're looking at automating a process, they still only end up automating their top 20% of their partners. So they're really leaving a significant chunk of their business without a digital record, right? And so one of the things that is the reasons for that is that historically, doing B2B integration for has been expensive. And so how do we reduce the cost of that integration? And I think the one key to that is to open up to other technologies, to other integration, technologies and methods, so that you can start to address that that long tail of your customers. So data quality in general, is the data available? I think is one huge area. But the other thing that I think is interesting about some of the smart devices and some of these new technologies is the usable and timely piece. So certainly, if I'm getting data from a smart device, that's going to be very timely, right? But if you think about, I think about this and I kind of envision these huge streams of data just flowing in from all of these devices. And so it creates the new challenge of how do I make that usable? And so you've got to think about, you've got to correlate all of this streaming data to something that is in a system somewhere, something that you can trace back to a customer order or a shipment. And so I think that brings its new challenge is, I've now got timely data, but how do I make sure it's usable?
You mentioned a lot there, a lot there to unpack, but I like some of the things you talked about. The first thing is, something I've talked about as well is kind of the 80-20 rule is that, because of the cost factor and the labor intensive nature of connecting trading partners, a lot of companies historically only really focused on those 20% of trading partners that accounted for, 80% of their transactions. But, the reality is that then they had a lot of blind spots in their supply chain. And today there's kind of, this bigger push toward, how do we get to that long tail, right, and get connected to those. So I think that's something that's new and different, and that's happening, today. And so I think that's something that I think certainly technology is helping in that area as well. So can you talk a little bit about, how technology might be helping to, bring in, that long tail supply chain partners? And you talked about, timeliness of data as well. Certainly EDI was kind of the primary form that people used to try to connect with, particularly with those large trading partners. Certainly EDI is not going anywhere, but that's certainly not the road forward either. So what were your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that that Alimica, we're a supply chain operating network, a business network. So I think having a network solution is one of the ways that you can start to address that long tail. Because as the promise of a network solution is you connect to the network and now you've got access to every other participant in the network, as long as you follow the rules for how to connect to the network. So that's always been that connect once, connect to all model has been very important to companies like Alimica. So that really hasn't changed. What I think has changed is the enabling technologies that companies like Alimica can use to start to relax those rules for how to connect, right? So, where it used to be, well, the rule for connecting is you must use this Edifact version 96A, blah, 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 whatever. And now we can, because of the advancements in technologies, we can really open that up and say, well, can you send it to us this way? Or do you have your API? We'll call that. Or if you want to call our API, we can give you that. Or if your technology challenged, then here's a portal or even an email solution. So I think that's one thing that's different. The concept's the same, but the ability to add some based on some of these new approaches and new technologies has really enabled us to kind of soften the rules for how to participate in the network.
Right. I mean, I think the reality is that there's no one size fits all approach to, connecting, trading partners. And I know you recently, we covered it on Talking Logistics in our news, announced an email, what I would call like a kind of a smart email solution for connecting with, some of the trading partners as another approach, right? So for those that want EDI and have EDI, that's one approach. But, particularly if you've got, smaller trading partners overseas, that might be less frequent transactions, something like a smart email is what I would call it, approach that can help digitize and bring them onto the network. I think it's a good approach too.
Yeah. And we're doing some interesting things like allowing our participants to brand those emails so that it goes out with their logo on it. So it kind of drives the adoption from their partners. Really kind of, and almost kind of fools them into using a portal as well. So it kind of gives them that, the email when they need it, they respond to it when they get it. They, it's the simplest and probably most convenient way for some of those smaller partners to participate.
Right. So my takeaway is always, it's making sure you have a diverse set of approaches that you're going to, connect to, and because the reality is that's the way the trading partner network kind of looks at it as well. You talked about supply chain operating networks. I mean, I've been a big proponent of the model for a long time as a more kind of scalable and effective way to connect, communicate, collaborate with trading partners. I mean, once you've got, that community built, that network built, obviously then you want to be able to, execute business processes on top of that, especially new ones. Can you give some examples of kind of some of the business processes that are being enabled on top of that foundation?
Yeah. So what you said is absolutely correct. First, you have to establish the digital record. So you've got to get the transactions electronically in the network. But then that does open up to some of those higher order types of collaborative solutions around booking or inventory or even cost management. So one example might be collaborating with your carriers for booking pickup appointments or delivery appointments. So you know what your operational constraints are, they know what their operational constraints are. Those are modeled in the network, and so you can collaborate and really optimize both sides of the equation. And that's really where the power of a network starts to come into play, because both sides benefit, and therefore driving more adoption and more value for all of the participants.
Right. So, I mean, when you look across, the different companies that you work with, and particularly those that you feel are kind of leading the way, particularly with supply chain visibility, I mean, what have been some of the key benefits that they've been achieving?
Mm-hmm. I think that kind of falls into two groups. Some of my customers, when they undertake a project like for supply chain visibility, they really want to quantify what the value is, and we usually end up helping them, and it kind of goes back to the efficiency of their customer service or their transport planner, so that they can handle more customers, more orders, more shipments. And so, which is really, goes back to the value of the automation itself, right? So just reducing manual activities, reducing the amount of time they're spending tracking shipments, tracking and addressing customer requests for where's my stuff. But more and more what we're seeing is some of those forward-leaning companies are really doing it to improve customer service. So they've recognized that if they can harness all this data and manage more effectively, then they're providing their customers with a more reliable experience. They're able to be more agile, and then really increasing the transparency. So all of this is kind of boosting their customer service levels, and ultimately, helping them become create more loyalty with their customers.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I mean, one of the things that I've been, seeing over the past, I would say 2 or 3 years, and part of this falls under the whole Amazon effect, discussion that people talk about. But I know that, if I interviewed folks, particularly on logistics, and say, do you view logistics as a cost center or as a competitive weapon? 10 years ago, the vast majority of people would have said, as a cost center, and the focus is really going to be on how can we invest in things that are going to help us to reduce costs. Now, cost management is always going to be, important, but more and more today, companies are saying, we're using it more as a competitive weapon. Specifically, we're looking to compete on service, on that service, dimension, because that's going to be the one that we're going to, differentiate ourselves the most on. Because right now, there's a lot of, price or cost parity, in certain industries. So the way that we can differentiate is to say, hey, if our customers now want smaller shipments, more frequent shipments, if they want to be able to get proactive alerts in terms of when something's going to arrive, and have that time be reliable and updated and so forth, we're more likely to get the business or retain that business or grow that customer than someone that's not able to compete on that service side. So I see that as, certainly one of those areas that's becoming more and more built into the value proposition of these solutions.
Right. And it's not so much about, again, it's efficiency gains, but it's not so much about reducing headcount. It's about how can we improve the quality of the communication that we have with our customers? What are some of the other value-added services we can start offering because we're not spending time tracking down data? So yeah, very few of the, in my observation, has it ever meant kind of a headcount reduction. It's been how can we use the improved efficiency to provide a higher quality experience to our customers.
Right, right. And I think that ties into, I mean, once you have that foundation built with the data quality, getting the trading partners connected, I think, the visibility aspect of it is really the stepping stone, if you will, to another topic that it's getting a lot of buzz today is, having these predictive, capabilities. And this is where BI and analytics and machine learning and all that is starting to play a role in, but you really need to have all the things that we've talked about in place already before you can truly, fully leverage those emerging technologies.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
So Cindy, we're kind of short on time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last question. I mean, as a way to wrap up, I mean, what questions should, supply chain executives ask themselves to assess whether their visibility capabilities are ahead of the curve or behind the curve, and kind of what action should they take to kind of continue to make progress in this area?
Sure. Yeah. So, one of the things I would say is that the advice I would give is you have people in your organization who've probably been working on B2B integration for years, right? So, you've got the access to the resources that can let you know how to make a project successful or not, because there are some, so there's some complexities about any kind of integration project. As far as a scorecard, though, I think, or how to assess your performance, I think just starting with what percent of your orders, what percent of your customers, what percent of your shipments have you automated, right? What percent have you established that digital record for? And then, starting there to figure out where you want to proceed. The biggest word of caution I would have for anybody starting this program is you have more variability in your processes than you think, right? So find one that is the most homogeneous to start with, but recognize that, when you start to scale, you're going to have to realize that Europe does it a little differently, and they don't put the data in the same place in your ERP system, which is going to mean the thing is going to look different when it comes to the network, et cetera, et cetera. So you have more variability than you expect, than you probably think, and so plan for that.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. Well, I think that's a great way to think about this and approach this. Well, Cindy, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think we hit some highlights and provided some good perspective in terms of where we are today with supply chain visibility and kind of what it takes to build that strong foundation so that we can get to and truly deliver on some of these more emerging technologies and future opportunities that are ahead of us. So again, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Very good. Yes, it's been a very exciting time for the integration world and the digitization world. So we're having a great time.
Yeah, and the thing I always say about this industry, there's never a dull moment. So I'm sure that we can come back a few months from now, and we'll have something completely new to talk about within this topic. So thank you to all of you who joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand on the Alemica website or on the Talking Logistics website, and you've got a question or a comment for Cindy, you can post it there. And I'm sure she'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.